Hi, friends. How are you doing today? I really hope that you guys are having the day that you deserve. My name's Carly Ramsey, and you are listening to the Serial Zodiac. I'm so excited that you're here and that you're wanting to listen to this episode. So, with that being said, I don't want to lollygag on too long, but I will be here for you guys every other Thursday to push you out new content. So, that being said, let's jump right into today's story. Thanks, guys. Before we get started in this episode, I do want to warn you guys that there are some very sensitive and graphic topics that will be talked about on this episode specifically. Um, it does get very deep, and I know some things can be a little sensitive to people, so I do just want to warn you. There's a graphic warning, there's sensitive subject warning, all kinds of warnings. So just be warned before you continue listening to this video. Thanks. Henry was a man whose life had been going wrong from the moment he was born, with abuse and failure marking his early years. However, here's where things went terribly south. His childhood manifested itself in such a disturbing way that he ended up murdering over 10 women in the most brutal ways possible. Henry is among the most disturbing serial killer cases in America's history, and he's still alive and on death row to this day. So here's the story of Henry Louis Wallace, and we're beginning right from the start. Henry Louis Wallace, known as the Taco Bell Strangler, was born on November 4th, 1965, making him a Scorpio. Scorpios are often characterized by traits such as intensity, secrecy, and passion. Some believe these traits can manifest in both positive and negative ways, potentially influencing behavior. In Wallace's case, the intensity and passion associated with Scorpios might have been seen as contributing factors to his crimes. His intense emotions could have driven him to commit violent crimes, and his secretive nature might have helped him avoid detection for a significant period. The manipulative and controlling tendencies often associated with Scorpios could be linked to the way he gained the trust of his victims, using his charm to disarm them before committing his crimes. However, it's crucial to emphasize that these astrological traits are broad generalizations and not scientifically backed explanations for criminal behavior. Wallace's actions were likely the result of a complex interplay of factors, including his troubled upbringing, personal history, psychological issues, and environmental influences. While his Scorpio traits might offer some speculative insights, they don't provide a comprehensive or scientifically valid understanding of his motives. Ultimately, attributing his crimes to his zodiac sign kind of oversimplifies the deep and multifaceted nature of criminal behavior. Understanding Wallace's actions requires a closer examination of his life circumstances mental health, and various influences that shaped him. Henry was born to a single mother in Barnwell, South Carolina. They were dirt poor, living in a house with no indoor plumbing or electricity. Henry never even knew his dad. His childhood was rough to say the least. Henry's mother would sometimes make him and his sister beat each other with a switch. And if that wasn't enough, his mom and sister would dress him up as a little girl and parade him around the neighborhood. When Henry was just 7 years old, he witnessed a gang rape, which is just horrifying. Henry's teen years were all over the place. In high school, he was the only male cheerleader, which made him stand out. And after high school, he bounced around a couple of colleges and eventually got a gig as a DJ at a local radio station, calling himself the Night Rider. But that didn't last long because he got caught stealing records and was fired. Running out of options, Henry decided to join the Navy, which was a common route for poor young black men in America. He spent 8 years as a sailor, traveled the world, and even married his high school sweetheart in 1985. But then burglary got him in trouble again. He was caught breaking and entering near a naval base and was dismissed from the Navy. However, because of his record, he got an honorable discharge. Not long after, in 1992, his wife left him, and he moved back in with his mom and sister, who had relocated to the Charlotte Mecklenburg area of South Carolina. Life in Charlotte was anything but stable for Henry. He got fired from several restaurant jobs before ending up as the manager at a local Taco Bell. He also started smoking crack cocaine and got one of his girlfriends pregnant in December of 1992. Around this time, Henry's criminal behaviors escalated from burglary and drug use to something much darker: serial murder. In early 1990, Henry killed Tashonda Betha and dumped her body in a lake in his hometown. It took weeks for her body to be discovered. The police questioned him about her disappearance and death, but they never charged him. He also got questioned for trying to rape a 16-year-old girl in Bardwell, but again, no charges. By this time, his life was in shambles. His marriage had fallen apart, he had gotten fired from his job at Sandoz Chemical Co., and fast forward to February 1991, and Henry decided to break into his old high school and the radio station where he used to work. He stole some video and recording equipment and got caught trying to pawn it. By November 1991, Henry moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, looking for a fresh start. He worked at various fast food places in East Charlotte. In May of 1992, he picked up Sharon Nance, who was a drug dealer and prostitute. When she demanded payment, he beat her to death and left her body by the railroad tracks. She was found a few days later. A significant turn of events on June 19th, 1992. Henry had a key to his girlfriend Sadie McKnight's apartment. She shared the place with Caroline Love, a co-worker at the local Bojangles restaurant. On that day, neither of them was home when Henry let himself in. When Caroline Love came back, Henry greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. Caroline, uncomfortable, told him that if he promised not to do it again, she wouldn't tell his girlfriend. But things took a horrific turn. Henry put her in a chokehold. He later describes to the police as the Boston choke until she was barely conscious. He dragged her to the bedroom, removed her clothes, and sexually assaulted her while maintaining the chokehold. When she started to struggle, he grabbed the nearest object, a curling iron, and used its cord to choke her to death. After Henry killed Love, he faced the grim task of disposing her body. He wrapped her in bed sheets, stuffed her into a large orange garbage bag, and dragged her out to his car without anyone noticing. Then he went back into the apartment, grabbed a roll of quarters, locked the door, and drove to the city limits of Charlotte to dump her body in a ditch. The same night, Sadie McKnight, Henry's girlfriend, came back to the apartment and got a call from Kathy Love, Caroline's sister. Kathy was worried because Caroline had missed a shift at Bojangles, which was totally out of character. Sadie had no idea where Caroline was either, and it struck her as strange that Caroline hadn't checked in. So Sadie, Kathy, and Henry himself went to the police station to file a missing persons report. The investigators found some suspicious things at Love's apartment: disrupted furniture, missing bed sheets, and a roll of quarters her supervisor had given her for laundry. Her hamper was full, meaning she hadn't done her laundry. Oddly enough, the investigation stalled there, and Henry wasn't even interviewed. Caroline was just declared missing, and the case was shelved. Henry returned to the dump site 2 days later and saw that Caroline's body was already decaying, describing it as looking like leather or an ET doll. When he checked again, a third time, all he found was bones. With no roommate, McKnight ended up moving in with her boyfriend, Henry. Fast forward 7 months. Henry was still living with McKnight, and on February 17th, 1993, he decided to visit Shanna Hawk, a teenager who had just come back from community college. Hawk was just taking off her coat when she heard the doorbell. It was her manager from Taco Bell, Henry. According to court records, Hawk let Henry in right away, and they chatted for about an hour. Hawk had a knack for gaining the trust of women who knew him. Feeling comfortable around him, Hawk teased him a bit about his relationship troubles with Sadie. As he was leaving, Henry hugged her and told her he wanted to have sex with her. Reluctantly, she agreed. He led her to the bedroom, told her to undress, and despite her crying, he proceeded to assault her. Afterwards, Henry told Hawk to get dressed and took her into the bathroom. He used the same Boston chokehold he had used on Caroline Love, rendering her unconscious. Then he ran a bath, put her body in it, went upstairs, took $50 from her purse, and left. Hawk's body was discovered by her boyfriend and mother. The autopsy showed she had been strangled with an object, causing ligature strangulation. The investigation didn't turn up much despite interviewing her coworkers, friends, and classmates. During 1993, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area was dealing with a high crime rate: 122 reported murders and 350 reported assaults, plus hundreds of missing persons reports, many of which were resolved within 24 hours. Despite this, there were only 7 full-time homicide investigators at the time of Henry's killing spree. This lack of resources and overwhelming number of cases likely contributed to why Henry could continue his horrific activities without getting caught sooner. His ability to blend in and gain trust, combined with the chaos of the crime-ridden area, allowed him to continue his spree, targeting vulnerable women and leaving a trail of pain and tragedy in his wake. About 4 months after Henry murdered Shauna Hawk, he went after another young woman who he worked with at Taco Bell, Audrey Spain. She was 24. She had just gotten back from vacation, and Henry, with his smooth talk and laid back vibe, charmed his way into her apartment. Henry's drug habit was getting worse, and crack cocaine wasn't cheap. He needed cash and thought Audrey might have access to the Taco Bell safe. So he rolled a joint and they got high together. when Audrey gradually letting her guard down. Once they were done, Henry suddenly threw her to the ground and demanded the combination to the safe. Audrey didn't know it. Frustrated, he asked about her personal bank account, but she had just returned from vacation and she was broke. Henry snapped. He put her in a Boston chokehold, dragged her into the bedroom, and raped her. During the attack, Audrey regained consciousness and begged him not to hurt her. But Henry didn't stop. After raping her, he told her to get dressed. As she turned her back, he choked her again until she passed out. Then he made a makeshift rope from a nightgown and a shirt and strangled her to death. He put her body in the shower, washed off any evidence, and then laid her in the bed. On his way out, he stole her credit card. The similarities between Shauna Hawk and Audrey Spain's murders were striking. Both were young, black, and attractive women killed in their homes. Both had worked at the same Taco Bell at some point, and they were both strangled and robbed of a small amount of money. Their bodies were washed, and there was no signs of forced entry indicating they knew their killer. Despite these similarities, the Charlotte Mecklenburg police didn't connect Audrey's murder to any other recent ones. The case remained unsolved, and the police concluded, like author Joseph Grinner, that the killer didn't follow a set pattern. 6 weeks later, Henry was back at it. This time he targeted Valencia Jumper, a friend of his sister's. He talked his way into her home, saying he needed to vent about a fight with his girlfriend. After chatting for a while, he suggested she call his girlfriend, Sadie McKnight, to let her know where he was. When Valencia turned her back, Henry choked her, dragged her to the bedroom, and raped her. He then strangled her to death with a towel. But Henry's methods changed here. He soaked Valencia's body in rum, put some pork and beans on the stove, turned it on high, removed the battery from her smoke detector, lit her body on fire, and left. He even took some of her jewelry to pawn later. Despite autopsy results showing no signs of carbon monoxide poisoning or soot in her airway, which is common in fire deaths, County Medical Examiner Michael Sullivan ruled Valencia's death as thermal burns, implying it was accidental. This ruling meant the case wasn't thoroughly investigated and the connection to other recent murders wasn't made. Sullivan later admitted it was a bad judgment call. Henry's spree continued, unchecked, largely because these investigative oversights. It's a harrowing tale of how a combination of charm, police missteps, and Henry's calculated brutality allowed him to continue his horrific crimes. The tragic reality is that more thorough investigations might have stopped him sooner, potentially saving lives. A month later, in September 1993, Henry went to Michelle Stinson's apartment. She was a college student struggling to make ends meet and a single mom of two young sons. He strangled and stabbed her right in front of her oldest son. And get this, in October, his own child was born. So, 5 weeks after killing Shauna Hawk on September 15th, 1993, Henry went to visit another friend from Taco Bell, Michelle Stinson. Michelle was 20 years old and had two little sons, aged 1 and 3. According to Henry's confession, after chatting for a bit, he hugged her and said he wanted to have sex. When Michelle said she was sick, Henry demanded to see her medicine, but she couldn't find any. He didn't believe her and ended up raping her on the kitchen floor. He tried to strangle her with his usual Boston choke, but ran to the bathroom to get a towel to finish the job. Michelle struggled. So Henry stabbed her 4 times in the back with a kitchen knife. Afterwards, he wiped his fingerprints from a glass, the foam, the door, the wall, and the floor with a washcloth. Michelle's 3-year-old son woke up and wandered into the kitchen, but Henry told him to go back to bed. He then fled the apartment, tossing the knife and the washcloth over a fence. Michelle's body was discovered by her 2 children, and when a friend came by, the 3-year-old said that mommy was sleeping on the kitchen floor. The medical examiner, Michael Sullivan, determined Michelle had died from stab wounds and ligature strangulation. The police knew she frequently ate at the Taco Bell where Henry worked, but still, no connection was made to the other murders. By this point, there had been 5 deaths and disappearances in 15 months within a 5-mile radius in East Charlotte. The Black community was frightened and angry, and justifiably so, accusing City Hall of not caring about 31% of Charlotte's population. The police department held an emergency press conference and appointed Sergeant Gary McFadden, a police officer who hadn't been involved in the cases, and he was the lead investigator. It's also very important to note that he wasn't told that he was the lead investigator on this until a couple of hours before the investigation, before the emergency press conference. 3 significant things happened in late 1993 and early 1994 that slowed Henry down. First, the police increased patrols in response to community outrage. Second, Henry became a father to a baby girl. Third, he got arrested for shoplifting on February 4th, but was released and didn't show up for his court date, resulting in a warrant for his arrest. Henry probably felt invincible after being arrested and released. He knew the authorities had no clue what he was up to. His confidence grew, his methods got sloppier, and his addiction to crack intensified, turning East Charlotte into a terror zone. 2 weeks later, Henry was craving crack and had no money. He visited Vanessa Mack, the sister of one of his Taco Bell employees. After chatting for a bit, he asked for a hug, which she refused. Then he asked for a drink, and when she turned to get it, he choked her with a pillowcase, demanding her bank card and PIN. She gave him a code, but it was wrong. He raped her, then strangled her with a towel. He took her TV, hauled a cab, and tried to withdraw money from her card, but it didn't work. Vanessa's body was found by her mother the next day. It's also very important to note that this was actually a pretty big break in the case, because whenever Henry tried to use her card at the ATM, that ATM had cameras, and at the time you couldn't take over $100 out of the ATM, and she had given him the wrong PIN code, so he was at the ATM struggling to kind of get it so get the money. So they not only had a picture of him from the ATM, but they also had a witness, the person that was behind him in line at the ATM, and that witness saw him. 2 more weeks passed, and Henry's addiction was in full control. On March 8th, he went to the apartment complex of his friend Vernon Woods, planning to rob, rape, and murder Woods' girlfriend, Brandy Henderson. When Woods unexpectedly answered the door, Henry pretended he was leaving town and said goodbye. Before leaving the complex, he visited Betty Bauckham, who worked with his girlfriend, McKnight, at Bojangles. He asked her to use her phone, and once inside, he attacked her, demanding the keys, safe combination, and alarm code for Bojangles. After resisting for 30 minutes, Betty gave in. Henry strangled her with a towel, raped her, and then stole her TV and car, which he sold for crack money. The very next night, Henry returned to the same apartment complex and finally got to Brandy Henderson. Pretending he had something for Woods, he gained entry. He attacked Brandy, demanding money. She only had a Pringles can of change. Henry raped her while she held her baby son. He then strangled her with a child, tried to choke the baby to stop its crying, and left, taking the TV and stereo, which he sold for crack. By now, the police were scrambling. Sullivan determined the recent deaths were from ligature strangulation. Sergeant McFadden called a meeting, and detectives noticed the similarities in the cases. Henry's name came up as someone all three victims knew. When Balcom's stolen car was found with Henry's handprint, they had their suspect. The hunt for Henry began. The police were finally connecting the dots, realizing they had a serial killer on their hands. It was a race against time to stop him before he killed again. On the same day the police were scrambling to piece everything together, Henry was out murdering his final victim, Deborah Slaughter. Deborah used to work at Bojangles with Henry's girlfriend, Sadie McKnight. Henry knew she smoked crack and figured he could talk her into buying some with him. But Deborah needed her money for rent. When he asked for a drink, she probably started to get suspicious. When he put a towel around her neck, she accused him of killing Betty Balcom and Brandy Henderson. She figured it out before the police did. Henry ordered her to perform a sexual act, but Deborah refused, saying, "I don't do that. You might as well go ahead and kill me." Henry tightened the towel and asked if she wanted to change her mind. She didn't. He raped her anyway, and afterwards, he told her to get dressed. Knowing she always carried a knife, he had her empty her purse, kicked the knife away, and took everything in her wallet. She gave him $40, slapped him, and screamed for the police. Henry choked her with the towel until she fell to the floor, and then stuffed a sock in her mouth and stabbed her 38 times. Henry took the money and left, but returned hours later to smoke crack in her bathroom. He grabbed a Chicago White Sox jacket, a baseball cap, and a butcher knife before leaving again and tossing them all away. Finally, on March 13th, 1994, Henry was arrested. He confessed to the murders of 10 women in Charlotte over a 12-hour interrogation. He went into chilling detail about each woman, how he raped, robbed, and killed them, and even talked about his crack addiction. It's a terrifying story of how one man led a double life, committing heinous acts while blending into the community. When Henry was finally arrested, Charlotte's police chief was quick to congratulate the officers and reassure everyone in East Charlotte that the women were safe now. But not everyone was buying it. A lot of folks in the Black community were pretty upset with how the police handled the investigation. They felt the cops had totally neglected the murders of Black women. Charlotte's police chief, Dennis Nowick, claimed he didn't even realize they had a serial killer on their hands until early March of 1994. That's when 3 Black women were killed within 4 days. The Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department ended up apologizing to the residents for not connecting the dots between the murders sooner. They said the cases were different enough to throw them off Henry's trail. The deaths were spread out and didn't seem similar until Henry went on a spree in March of 1994. It wasn't until March 9th of 1994 that the police warned East Charlotte there was a serial killer on the loose. One young woman pointed out that the police didn't seem to care because they saw the victims as fast girls who hang out a lot. However, the victims' families and the press described these women as pretty, hardworking, and serious. People wanted to know why it took so long for the police to catch such a reckless killer. The community, especially the Black community, demanded answers. Dee Stumper, Shauna Hawk's mother, said the victims weren't prominent people with socioeconomic status. They weren't special, and they were Black. Deborah Slaughter's father echoed this sentiment, suggesting the girls' murders were a low priority because of their race and economic status. Daryl Allen, a retired police officer, called for Sergeant McFadden's dismissal, arguing that Henry should have been a suspect in Caroline Love's disappearance back in 1992. Charlotte's National Organizer of Women called for an independent counsel to investigate the police department, citing concerns about economic, racial, procedural, or managerial issues. The police claimed their inability to catch Henry was due to inexperience with serial murder investigations. Early in 1994, they sought help from the FBI, but the FBI wrongfully concluded the murders weren't the work of a serial killer. Henry didn't fit the typical profile. He was Black, he killed people he knew, whereas most serial killers are white and kill strangers. FBI expert Robert Russler even testified that Henry was going about it in the wrong way. The police argued they had no experience with serial killers, but Henry's victims all had something in common, which should have made it easier to connect the dots. In May of 1994, Dee Stumper, the mother, Dee Stumper of Mothers of Murdered Offspring, asked Charlotte City Council to investigate the police department and offer better training for investigators. The council requested a report, but decided not to hear it until after Henry's trial. No briefing has occurred to this date. When it came down to Henry's trial, it dragged on for 2 years to issues with the trial location, DNA evidence, and picking a jury. The trial finally started in September of 1996. During the opening arguments, prosecutor Marcia Goodnow was pushing for the death penalty. On the other hand, defense attorney Isabel Day was arguing for a life sentence. She claimed Henry had a mental illness and that the murders weren't first degree because they didn't stem from premeditation and deliberation. Psychologist Faye Sultan testified that Henry had been a constant victim of physical and mental abuse from his mother since birth and was mentally ill during these killings. Sultan argued for a life sentence without parole instead of the death penalty. Finally, on January 7th, 1997, Henry was found guilty of 9 murders. By January 29th, he was sentenced to 9 death sentences. After his sentencing, Henry addressed the victims' families, saying, "None of these women, none of your daughters, mothers, sisters, or family members in any way got what they deserved. They did nothing to me that warranted their death." Henry became known as the serial killer who targeted young Black women and showed no real remorse for his actions. He wrote some insincere letters of forgiveness to the victims' families, but he never really explained why he did what he did. Now, his defense lawyers tried to play the broken home card, saying his rough upbringing was to blame. But come on, lots of people come from single parent homes and turn out just fine. They become good, productive members of society. Henry could have made better choices, but he didn't. Instead, he chose a dark path. And get this, while on death row, he married his housekeeper, Rebecca Terrorized. So, what's the deal with Henry? Is he a charmer or a misogynist? Opinions vary depending on who you ask. Some, like psychologist Faye Sultan, say he had serious issues with women. Others saw him as a smooth talking ladies' man. During his trial, Henry claimed to be God's avenger, targeting women who he felt humiliated and ridiculed him. This statement was downright blasphemous, yet some people close to him described him as a charmer who attracted many women. But back when he worked at that radio station in Barnwell, he was known as Knight Rider because of his smooth, sexy voice. Even FBI expert Robert Ressler found him mysterious during an interview in December of 1996. But seriously, how can someone with such a deep seated hatred for women be seen as a ladies' man? It's a twisted situation, to say the least. Since being incarcerated, Henry has confessed to more murders, claiming he killed women around the world while stationed in the Navy, potentially bringing his death toll to nearly 20. To this day, Henry is still on death row. Several of his appeals have been denied since 1997, with the latest one having been rejected in 2005. There has been no execution date set as of yet. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Hey, it's me again. I just wanted to come back and thank you once again for listening to this podcast episode. And like I always say, stay safe, stay suspicious, and stay observant. Bye.